A sink tip line is basically a floating line, so all of your running line floats, but the end section, the tip, is usually a clear intermediate sinking line. So it gets down to the bottom. You can fish to fish that are in deeper water than you would with a floating line. It's normally around 10 to 15 foot long, clear tip. One of the big advantages in the clear tip is you can use shorter leaders because the coloured section of the fly line is much further away from the fly. So you've got another 10 to 15 feet of clear tip that the fish are unlikely to see compared to the coloured floating section. If you were using a floating line in the same situation, you would probably need a longer leader. So that's one of the pluses. However, there's a bit of a minus there with tracking the fly, because it's a lot harder for the angler as well as the fish to see from the end of your running floating line to where your fly is, because it's all clear, and then you've got your leader there that's usually clear as well. So that's a little bit of a disadvantage, but not a big one. If you're wading, there's a big advantage in it because the running line floats. A fairly easy pickup and recast. Not as easy as a floating line, so if you're fishing really or wading in really shallow water, I'd still stick with a floater. But if you're wading in slightly deeper water, the sink tip is the way to go. The tip, because it sinks, isn't affected by chop and swell, contours of the surface water, whereas a floating line will be affected by that and can put some slack into your line. So you're more likely to keep tight on your fly. It gets down deeper, that's the big advantage. But there's one disadvantage that people need to be aware of, and it's something I've noticed a lot when I'm guiding as well. For water that's around 1 metre deep, then a floating sink tip is ideal. If it gets much deeper than that, you can have issues where you can end up with some slack in your line, because this green section here is the floating running line on the surface of the water. This lighter blue section is the sink tip going down to a permit tailing on it there. This area here can cause slack in your line, and slack in your line there can make it more difficult to set the hook in a fish. Because the running line is floating on the surface and the tip goes down on a different angle, you can end up in deeper water with slack in your line caused by that. Normally, I use sink tips fishing out of a boat. If it's more than 1.5 meters, you're better off using an intermediate line, which we're about to cover after this. Or if it's really shallow, you know, from up to, say, knee deep, then you're better off using a floating line. But that area in between, a sink tip is ideal for getting that fly down to where the fish are.